All right, let's go ahead and get started with part two of lesson two of going over basic drawing and color in processing. And so at this point, I hope you've taken the time to start at kind of this little challenge here where you have drawn something with at least five different shapes and lines with using at least three distinct types of shapes. And so hopefully you have that. You will continue working on this here in a second. But before we do, I want to talk about color and how can we use color to actually start adding, well, of course, color to our drawings in processing. So we're going to go over a few background things with color, and then we'll talk about how we can actually make that happen with code. And so first off, color, how do you make things pretty in processing? Well, first let's talk about, if you have a shape or a line or whatever, some different kind of components of that can be colored. One is like the fill of that shape, and one is the stroke. And so the difference between the fill and the stroke, let me take out my little marker thing here. So let's talk about the stroke first. So let's imagine you have a shape like a circle or something like that. The stroke of the circle, you can imagine what that is going to be is it's going to be the line of the circle that you would have drawn if you draw a circle with a pencil. And so I'm going to try my best here with my mouse of drawing a circle. But if I drew a circle kind of right here, this line I'm drawing right now refers to the stroke of that circle. So let's say if I make the stroke red, then that means this line would be red. Right now the stroke is black, and so that line that you use to draw kind of the outline of your shape, that is the stroke. Same thing with a rectangle. If I drew a rectangle, very rough rectangle here with my mouse, but you can see this outline of the rectangle, that is what the stroke is. Same thing with the triangle. It's the line that I'm drawing right now. That is the stroke. It's the outline of the shape. So you can color the stroke of things in processing. So you can make it red, pink, white, black, whatever color you can think of, you can make the stroke that color. So that's one thing. That's the stroke. The other thing is the fill, and that is the interior color of the shape. And so like right now, this circle, right here where I'm coloring in on all this inside of the circle, this would be the fill. And so if I, made the fill of the circle red, in this case I'm making it black just because that's what I have available to me. But the fill is just the inside color of this. Same thing for all of this. The fill of the triangle is the center, the inside. Same thing, rectangle, the fill is the color of the inside. And so I'll show you how to control the colors of these things in processing as you draw your shapes. So hopefully that makes sense. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about how we actually define color in processing and also in any computer language, basically. And so, first off, if you want to end up coloring the stroke, use the stroke command. You might have guessed this. If you want to color or change the color of the fill of a shape, use the fill command. You might have already looked at this in the processing documentation as well. But, with these commands, you may be wondering, well, what parameters do you give these commands? What things do you put in the parentheses here to control what the color is? And so that's what we're going to talk about next. And we are going to talk about RGB. You may have heard this before, maybe not, it may be new to you, but RGB, that is just a system that allows you to specify different colors. And so what RGB is, it requires you to give it three numbers. One number is going to be for R, one's going to be for G, and one's going to be for B. What R, G, and B stand for is different colors. So R is red, so R stands for red. G stands for green, B stands for blue. And we're going to give three numbers for each of these, for any color you want, whether it's white, black, brown, gray, pink, magenta, whatever. You will give three values for these numbers, the red, green, and blue, and it will kind of make a color. You can kind of think of this almost like the primary colors, right? Where if you combine different colors, you can get new ones. Same thing here with red, green, and blue. If you can combine them in different ways, you actually get some different colors out of that. And so then you may be wondering, okay, so if we're going to give values to R, G, and B, what kind of values are you going to give? We're going to give a number where, one number is going to be like the minimum, one number is going to be the maximum. And the range of this is a bit weird. The range of numbers that R, G, and B can be is between 0 and 255. The reason for this is like a binary reason because computers think in binary, but it doesn't really matter. Just remember that 0 is going to be like the minimum amount that a color can have, and 255 is the max that a certain color value can have. right? And so what this means is that if we have a color, let's say, let's think about the RGB. Let's say we want the color red. What value would you give it, for these three numbers? Well, for red, you want, well, of course, you want a lot of red. So you'd make R to equal to 255. But if you only want red, you don't want it to be combined with anything else. You would just say let G, which is green, be 0, and let B also be 0. So if I move on to the next slide real quick, you can see I even have kind of the values associated with this. So if you want something like a red, well, you want to say, well, R value is going to be max. Green and blue are going to be minimum because you don't want any green or blue mixed in because you want just pure red. Now, let's say you want yellow. Well, yellow is a mix between red and green. And so what you could say is, hey, have max red, max green, and no blue. And it turns out you don't have to have max. If you want it to be a little bit more of a reddish yellow, you could just lower what the green value would be. Maybe make it 200 or something like that. So you can actually adjust how much of each color that you have. It's worth going over, I think, white. What would white be? Well, white, if you have maybe some physics knowledge or something, it's just a combination of all colors. So if you want something to look white, you just say, hey, have max red, max green, max blue. And so that will make something look white. Black is the opposite of that. It's it's where there are no colors in there, right? So your brain interprets that and perceives that as being black. It's the complete absence of all colors. And so if you want to show black, you just have R, green, and blue all be 0. And so that will make it look black. And so that being said, let's now show how this actually would work in processing. And so I already mentioned to you the the stroke and fill commands, and we wonder what parameters would these require, right? Well, they all are going to require 3 parameters, and it's going to be the RGB values. And so let's go ahead and kind of mess with that, right? And so if I go, you can think about this here for a second, but let's go back here to ignore that. That's coming up later. Let's say, we drew a circle, and I made it, somewhere kind of close to the middle, whatever. It doesn't matter. Let's make it somewhat big, but not all that big. So right here, and this should look familiar to you, something like this, right? Where I have my size I just defined, and then I have a circle just kind of drawn here, right? What I can do, let's say I want to change the fill color of this circle. What I would do is I would say before where I typed in circle, I would say fill, the fill command, parentheses, and then my 3 parameters. My parameters are going to be the RGB values. So let's just start off saying I want my circle to be red. Well, what 3 numbers would I give it? And you may have already guessed this. I want a lot of red, of course, because if I want it to look red, and then no green, no blue. So by saying that before the circle operation, what this does is it says, okay, processing, set the fill to be red, and then draw the circle. So let's see what this does here. And you see that has actually changed the color of my circle. And of course, we can mess with this, right? Let's say I don't want it to be quite that red. That's like a lot of red. If I want to make this maybe just 100. Well, there's still only red. There's no green or blue, but it won't be as vivid of red. You see now it's like darker, right? It goes more towards black instead of white. If I want yellow, I can say, this, a lot of red, a lot of green. Press play on that. Got some yellow. Let's say I want pink. This is actually funny enough. How do you get pink? It's actually a combination of red and blue. There's some interesting kind of neuroscience and perceptions about that. But yes, a really nice bright pink. And if that's a bit bright for you, you can just do, let's say 150 here, 150 for the blue. Do that, and you can see it's more of a purple, but it's a darker pink type of color, right? So you can just mess with this and you can get whatever color you want. This is actually a good time I want to point out. Let's say you want a certain color, but you don't know what the RGB values are, right? Because who knows what the RGB values are, right? If you have a very particular type of orange you want, how do you know what the RGB values are? It turns out processing has a built-in tool that makes this very easy. If you just go to the toolbar right here, click on Tools, and then Color Selector, it brings up a new window, which allows you to kind of just manually select, any color, and it kind of previews this color right here in this box. Let's say there's a very special orange that I like. I really, really want it like a pale orange, maybe. Something kind of like that, let's say. What I can then do, you can see it gives me the RGB values for this, right? So I'm like, oh, I want my circle to be this orange. Well, I can see my R value should be 240. My, let's see, G value should be 201. And my blue value should be 104. And then if I click play, you can see now my circle is that exact shade of orange. So that's just a helpful tool that processing has kind of built in to allow you to really fine tune the colors and stuff. Okay, but that's cool. So we have a color here, but let's say we want to change the stroke. Right now the stroke is black. Let's say I want a white stroke, right? Well, same type of thing, I would say, before I draw the circle, I would say stroke, and then how would I make it white? You know, what 3 RGB values would I use? Well, I would use 255 for red, 255 for blue, or green, 255 for blue as well. Parentheses, and then of course I need my semicolon, because you always need a semicolon at the end of your command. If I click play on this, you'll see same circle, but I now have a white stroke around it. And of course, it doesn't have to be black or white. I can have a, you know, let's do a pink stroke. Let's see how that looks with this orange. That's not too bad, actually. It's not as bad as I thought. I kind of like that. And so you can make the stroke whatever color you want and make the fill any color you want. Now, you may be wondering, you know, I put the fill and stroke before where I drew the circle. You may wonder, well, what happens if I take that and put it after where I drew the circle? Well, if I click play here, you'll see it didn't change the color of my circle. The default fill for any shape in processing is white. The default stroke is black. So you can see, even though I have my fill and stroke here, it didn't affect my circle. That's because, and we haven't talked about this yet, but order matters in your code. Processing runs your code kind of in order. There's a few exceptions to that, but it doesn't matter at this point, right? It will run the code in order from line 1 on down. So what does it do? First it says, okay, it sets the size, it then draws the circle, and not until after it draws the circle does it change the setting for fill and stroke. So this does not affect any change except for anything that's drawn after these commands. So just to show you, let's say I draw another circle after this. I'm going to put it maybe in this top left corner somewhere. So I'm going to say 100 for the position, and for the size, I'll say also 100, whatever. Do that. If I click play now, you'll see that this circle, this second one, its colors, its fill and stroke was changed, but this first one, which was defined here, was not. So if you want to change the color of something, you need to change the fill and stroke before you tell processing to draw it. So order does matter in your code. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and so I think that's good for that topic. So let's go ahead and move on from there. Let's talk about as well the background color, because if I bring up my processing sketch, you see I have some shapes here, you know, some circles I've drawn. You know, I can make them whatever color I want. It's all cool and fun. But the background of this is just this gray, right? Maybe you don't want that, right? Maybe you want to make a starscape, right? Where you want this to be black, or maybe you want it to be like a horizon, where maybe you want it to be like a sky blue or something like that, right? You want to color this background, not have it be this boring gray. How do we do that? Well, it turns out there's a command for that as well. The command for that, for changing the background color, is just background. And so it takes in 3 parameters, and you may have already guessed it, or maybe you read the slide here. The parameters you would give it is just the RGB values, the red, green, and blue values for the color of that background. And so let's mess with that, right? Let's go back to our example here. I am going to I'm going to do this. Don't worry about what that does. I can go ahead and say that what this does, if you put these 2 slashes in front of something, it comments it out. What that means is that it's still here, so I can use it later if I want, but processing will not run this code if it sees these 2 slashes. And so what I did to make this happen is I highlighted these lines, and I said Control/ for Windows or Command/ for Mac, and it will comment that out. So now if I press play, it actually will not run those lines of code. It only runs the line of code that's not commented out. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to go back to it later, but we don't need it right now. So that's another little quick helpful note. But let's mess with the background, right? So if I say background, and let's say I want, let's say like a nice light, maybe blue background, right? And so, let's be smart about this. Let's go to color selector. Let's try to select a nice kind of, ooh, that's actually kind of nice right there. Might be a little bit lighter, something like that. Look at that. I kind of like that. Let's say it's a nice little blue. I can see what the RGB is for this color. It's 126, 220, 245. So 126, 220, 245. Close my parentheses, semicolon, just like everything else we've done so far. And then now if I click play, I should be able to see the background change color. And it is. Ooh, this is nice. I really like that blue. That's a good blue. So I can now change the color of my background using this command. And so now if I'm going to put my circles back here, so I'm going to highlight those, do Command/ for Windows or Control/ for Windows, Command/ for Mac. So now they're not coming out anymore. So now it will run this code when I press play. So if I press play here, it then will draw my circles with my new colored background. That's pretty neat. It's pretty cool. And so one other note I want to make about this is before I said order matters, like in your code, right? So where you put this fill and stroke command matters, where the order I draw my circles matter, all this good stuff. Well, let's play with that. Let's play with this ordering of things, right? So if I take the background, if I cut it, and I'm going to move it to the very bottom, paste it there. Let's see what happens, right? And the way if you don't know, the way I'm cutting that is, if you right click, you can cut, copy, and paste, all that if you right click. But the shortcut to cut it means to copy it and remove it is Control X. Or if you're on Mac, it's Command X. And then to paste it, so if I have it in my clipboard and want to paste it back, I can do Control V on Windows or Command V if you're on Mac, just in case you don't know. But anyways, let's see what this does, putting the background at the bottom of my program. If I press play here, you can see, hey, I still have my background, but I don't see any of my circles anymore. They're not here. Like, what the heck? Where are they? So I actually encourage you to think about this. Why would putting background down here change, the fact that I don't see my circles anymore? And a hint about this is what background does is whenever you call the background command, it's almost like a paintbrush that paints the whole background of the processing window. So it just goes and it paints every pixel this color. So once it sees this command, it then paints the background, all the pixels in the background that color. And so think about this. What's actually going on, I can go ahead and say, is extend that so we can see. What it does is it runs code in order. So it says, okay, here's the size. It then draws a circle. It then changes the fill and stroke, and then draws a new circle with that new fill and stroke. So it has drawn those circles, and not until after that does it do the background. And what does the background command do? It paints every pixel in the window this color. So what this has done, it has drawn the circles, but then it painted over those circles with this new background color. And so just to show you that is what's happening, if I come here and I put this background after this first circle, but before the second circle, if we look at this and press play, you'll see that I no longer see my first circle, but I can still see my second circle. Because what it's doing now is it drew the first circle, but then it painted over it with this background. And then after that, it drew this second circle, right? And so remember, order matters. So if you want to set your background to be a certain color and don't want to cover up any of your drawings, what you need to do is put background towards the beginning of your program. So if I put it back up here towards the top and I press play, you'll see that first thing it does is sets the size, of course. Then it paints the background. And then on top of the background, it draws this circle and then it draws this circle. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, it's not only background that can draw over things. We can also draw shapes over other shapes. So let's say I want to draw a rectangle over this circle right here. And here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make myself a comment. And so we mentioned comments here a second ago. You may also be wondering why comments are useful. I can also write notes for myself, right? So this is a note for me. So I can write myself notes that it's really good for humans for us to read, but because it has these two slashes here, processing won't try to run this as code, right? So if I press play, it doesn't break anything, but I can still say, I can make myself notes. So I could say, this circle is white, right? And then I can make a note down here. This circle is orange. So if I press play, you see those notes, they don't mess anything up for me, but they do kind of give myself some little notes. So when I'm looking back through my code, I know which circle is the white one because I've made a note of that. And just to show you, like if I did not have these two slashes and try to write it, it tries to run this line as code, and it says, "Wait, what is circle? What are these words? Why is there's no semicolon?" It freaks out, right? Because computers need a very precise grammar, and human English or any language does not match that, and so that does not quite work. And so you need to have these slashes if you want to leave yourself notes. I do highly encourage you to leave yourself notes and comments in your code. It's super, super helpful, especially once we start having programs where we have dozens or hundreds or maybe even thousands or tens of thousands of lines, right? It can be really hard to know where certain things are without comments. So it's good for you to help you understand what's going on and to know, where things are organized. It's also good for anyone else who reads your code, right? Because it's very, very common you'll put your code online for other people to make use of and to make really cool, beautiful things with, right? And I will go ahead and tell you from experience that it really, really sucks if you think you found some code that's going to be really awesome and you're going to do all these cool, amazing things with it, but you download it and you can't understand a thing that's going on, right? So a lot of times if you have comments written out in your code, it really, really helps someone, including yourself, when you go back and try to read it. It's really helpful to help people, to help humans understand what's going on with the code. But that's a bit of an aside. But now what I want to do is show you, order matters for background. If we have the background at the end, it paints over everything. But we can also draw shapes over other shapes, right? And so let's say I'm going to draw a rectangle, on top of this first circle, right? So I'm going to say, hopefully you've experimented with this. If I want to draw a rectangle, it's the rect command. I need to know, if I want to put it over this circle, I need to make sure it's at the same position. So I'm going to say, make it start at X position of 400, a Y position of maybe 300, and then the next two is for the width and height. You can look this up in the processing documentation if you want, but this is the X position of the top left corner. This is the Y position of the top left corner. The third parameter is going to be the width of the rectangle. So I'm going to say, I'm going to make it pretty big, 200, and then I'm going to make it just 100 pixels tall. I think that should do it. So if I click play on this, you'll see that my rectangle is sitting on top of my circle. That's because, remember, order matters. What processing did is first it painted the background blue. Right, that's this line. Then it drew the circle, and then it drew the rectangle after that, meaning that it drew the rectangle on top of that circle, right? So it's covering it up. And so just to show you that that is what's happening, if I flip the order, if I go here and say draw the rectangle first and then do the circle and click play, you'll see that now the circle is on top of the rectangle. So order does matter when you're drawing these things. And so, you can actually make use of this. Like if you want to make a car, like this is almost a car, doesn't have enough wheels, right? But you can imagine this could maybe be the start of a car where you want the wheels to kind of be covering the body of the car. So this is actually useful, right? And you can even say maybe that's the sun. I don't know. And so you can actually make use of that in your drawings, right? By covering up certain shapes. It gives you a sense of perspective. And so that being said, I believe that actually may be everything I want to cover in this lesson. So order matters. So that being said, it's now time for you to continue your kind of assignment that you already started, because you've sort of already started drawing a thing with some shapes. Maybe you drew an actual thing. Maybe it's just abstract lines and shapes everywhere. Whatever. I encourage you now to add some color to your drawings. Have at least 2 different colors. You can use the RGB lookup tool to get very precise with that. And I encourage you to have a background color as well, because that makes things fun, right? Have a background color, color your stroke, color your feel of your shapes, do all that good stuff like that. And a further challenge, if you want, after you do that, is make a new processing sketch and draw an emoji, right? Draw whatever your favorite emoji is, whether it's the thinking emoji, the poop emoji, a heart emoji, whatever kind of stuff you like. Go ahead and try to make an emoji. Draw something in processing using these new tools that you have just learned about, because you now have all the tools that will allow you to do this. And forget the due date here. So yeah, that being said, I hope this was helpful to you, and I will see you next time.